Hey, good afternoon, folks. You are watching the Alofa movement, and I am Leiataua Dr. John Peterson. Thank you for tuning in today. I appreciate it. And I've been enjoying going live here on the YouTube channel and sharing some information with folks. Hopefully, what I've shared so far has been helpful to some or all who have been able to check out the channel. Today, I'm just going to jump right in and share some perspective and some thinking thoughts on Uber versus Lyft. I've done some driving with both companies or for both companies in the past 6-7 months. And I wanted to share some perspective on kind of my experience both as a driver, but also what I've heard from various riders over the past few months. One of the things that I wanted to mention before I got started is that there's an article that came out in The Verge, I think, today, and it talks a little bit about the New York City Council's decision to put a cap on the number of Uber drivers and Lyft drivers that can be active in the city of New York. And so if you haven't had a chance to check that article out, if this is a topic that you're interested in, either as a potential driver or as a current driver or as a rider, it's something that you'd want to maybe check out. It's a very interesting debate between the city and the two giant tech companies of Uber and Lyft, and what their thoughts are on both sides regarding the level of regulation that's needed and appropriate for the two companies and all the different rideshare that occurs in the city of New York. I think the New York City market for Uber and Lyft is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, markets in the United States. And it's definitely going to have some impact and influence on what happens in some of the other metropolitan areas across the United States. And so I won't go into great detail about what was in the article, but will state that it's an ongoing debate and a discussion that will be happening maybe even in a city near you. Secondly, I want to give a shout out to Andre Knight, my homeboy Andre. If you're watching this, I hope you find the information helpful. He and I have been talking a little bit lately, and he expressed some interest in learning more about Uber and Lyft. And I have other friends and colleagues that have expressed interest in learning more about Uber and Lyft, mostly from a driver perspective or potential driver perspective. So, excuse me, I thought I would do a little quick informational session today on Uber versus Lyft. I started driving for Lyft, I think it was back in late November of 2017, just a little bit, not very much at all. And then I think right around March of 2018, I signed up with Uber and was able to drive for both Uber and Lyft, and have been driving mostly for Uber the past few months when I have been driving. Lyft and Uber are similar. I don't know a lot about the companies and how similar or different they are, but I do know that the platform that Uber uses and the platform that Lyft uses is a relatively similar concept in terms of how they provide rideshare services to people in metropolitan areas, as well as how the drivers use the two different apps, the Uber app and the Lyft app. I have to be honest, my experiences are somewhat limited. You know, I would not consider myself to be a full-time driver or a person who drives on the regular, but I have driven enough to form some opinions and perspectives on both companies. So let's talk first a little bit about Lyft. The Lyft platform and the Lyft app is a pretty straightforward app. There aren't a whole lot of bells and whistles on it as a driver from what I could see. One of the things that Lyft talks about in some of their literature is that they try to ensure that, they state that they try to ensure that drivers receive a certain percentage of the proceeds that come from each ride. I want to say that number is right around 24 to 25% is what Lyft ends up taking off the top for rides. And so if you're driving for Lyft, at least in my experience when I've been driving for Lyft and I run the numbers and check on a day or a evening or a couple hours worth of driving, typically what I found is that the driver, me in that case, generally receives anywhere 75 to 76% of the revenue that comes from the cost of the ride. Both Uber and Lyft use formulas, multiple formulas based on time, distance, fare rate to calculate what the cost of the ride is. And I can talk a little bit more about the differences between the cost for consumers. But overall, I would say Lyft typically is in that 24 to 25% is what they take off the top. And then the driver is left with the remaining 75 to 76%. That's been kind of my average experience with Lyft. And I haven't driven for Lyft in a few months, but I think that's about what I remember the numbers breaking out to be in terms of Lyft. So if your ride costs $10, there's a pretty good chance that you will receive as the driver right around $7 to $7.50 for that ride. I can't state that that's the way it is across the board and across every city, because I think the fares are different and the formulas are different based on which city you're in. But I think in Minneapolis, I think it's pretty safe to say that they're taking 25, 26, 27%. I have not seen them take more than 30%. But you have to also consider that when you calculate the amount that you get, it's also based on, in some instances, any bonuses that you might make from driving. And the more you receive in bonus and or tips, the more you're going to receive percentage-wise of the total cost of the fare. I would say Lyft has been pretty solid to work with and work for as an independent contractor, because your status as a driver is as an independent contractor. I did have some issues with Lyft regarding my vehicle back in January. Was rear-ended by a vehicle, not at fault, but I did not really receive very good customer service from Lyft during the 2 to 3 weeks that it took to get the gate on my Honda Pilot fixed. I found it very difficult to talk to someone who could give me a straight answer, and Lyft does not have a local office that they keep here on the regular in the Twin Cities. And as a result, I didn't really feel like the customer service was very good. In fact, I thought it was poor. I received multiple different perspectives and answers and run around and all sorts of different things, which really kind of turned me off to Lyft. I do know that they have weekly meetings for Lyft drivers, and I have not been to one of the weekly meetings for the Lyft drivers. But if you're interested in that, I can provide you with information on the location and the time of those meetings. I think they occur once a week, and they've been at Dunn Brothers, if I'm not mistaken. Now, this is based on what I knew of Lyft 5-6 months ago, and is not reflective necessarily of the state of Lyft in Minneapolis and St. Paul today. One of the things that's unique with Lyft is that they offer bonuses. And the bonuses work like this. There are 3 main criteria for earning a bonus and driving for Lyft. One is you have to give a certain number of rides during the week. And usually they quantify the week as being 4 a.m. in the morning, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe 5 a.m. in the morning on Monday to the next week's Monday morning at 4 or 5 a.m. That's what they consider to be the week. And one of the criteria they use for bonuses is the quantity of rides. So the total number of rides that you provide during that 1 week time span. A second criteria that they use for determining how bonuses are given to drivers is by providing a certain percentage or accepting a certain percentage of the rides that come your way as a driver. And that percentage, I believe, when I last checked, was 90%. So what that means is if you get 100 ride requests over the course of 7 days, 1 week, you have to accept at least 90 of those rides to qualify for the bonus. And if you don't, then you don't hit that criteria. And by not hitting that criteria, you're not eligible for the bonus. That's kind of a unique twist in how Lyft does that for drivers, based on a percentage. Seems like it's not a big deal, but it can be problematic when you've got requests coming from long distances in the middle of a snowstorm. And that is something that I have given feedback to Lyft on pretty frequently, that in the middle of a snowstorm and you're driving in traffic downtown Minneapolis or in the metro area or in the city, be it St. Paul or Minneapolis, the last thing that you want to do is pick up a ride request that's 30 minutes out in the suburbs, around the 694 and 494 interstate loop. It just doesn't make sense. And that's been a problem that I've run into with the Lyft app, is that sometimes you get those requests and it just doesn't make sense logistically for you to try and drive all the way out there. But if you don't pick up 90% of your rides, you lose your bonus for the week, which is a very important part of doing rideshare, driving as a driver for Lyft and for Uber. The third criteria for Lyft is you have to provide so many rides during what they call peak hours. And that's generally during the morning commute. Sometimes it's 5 to 8 or 5 to 9, but mostly it's 6 to 8 or 6 to 9 in the morning during the week, Monday through Friday. And then they also have some peak hours on Friday and Saturday evenings. Those peak hours range in different times, but usually it's anywhere between 9 and 10 o'clock at night up till bar time, which is usually about 3 o'clock. I don't know if they do any peak hours on Sundays. They used to do that back in the day, but I don't think they do now. You have to give so many rides when you drive for Lyft. You have to give so many rides during those peak hours. It's a special type of ride. And it's Lyft's way of ensuring that the majority or a good amount of their drivers are out on the roads when the demand for the rides is highest, i.e. during the morning commute, afternoon commute, and Fridays and Saturday evenings. That's good for Lyft, and it's good for the consumer, but it can be problematic for the driver, because if you don't get the requisite number of peak rides during the week, then you don't qualify for the end of the week bonus. And so it does kind of lock you into a schedule in which you have to drive at certain times in order to hit the whatever the prescribed number of peak rides is. So you've got peak rides, you've got quantity or just total number of rides, and then you've got the 90% or higher acceptance rate that you have to hit. If you hit all those three categories, the bonus that you receive for Lyft is actually pretty decent. I've seen anywhere from $75 to $150 to $250 to even, I think, $330 per week bonus on top of what you would get for your regular rides. And of course, some of those rides are at a regular fare rate, and some of the rides are at a higher fare rate. I think Lyft uses the 100%, 200%, 300%, 400%, 500%. I think the highest I've ever seen is about 600 or 700%. That was in the middle of a snowstorm this last winter, where the cost of the rides were 6 times the normal rate. And that, in those instances, it can be relatively lucrative to drive for Lyft and also for Uber. So that's a little bit about the Lyft platform. The Uber platform is similar in some ways to the Lyft platform, but it's different in others. I have found the Uber platform to be less complicated and less structuring. And what I mean by that is the bonuses that Uber provides you as a driver are based solely on the quantity of rides provided during a given time frame. And so on any given week, you might be given a promotional opportunity to drive 12 rides and earn an additional $25 Monday morning at 6 o'clock up through Friday morning at 6 o'clock. So over those 5 days, if you give X number of rides, you can earn, in this case 12, you can earn an additional $25. When it comes to Uber, there is no uh, criteria for peak hours, and there is no criteria that I've seen for acceptance rate. And that's one of the reasons why I've kind of shifted to doing more driving with Uber when I do drive on the side. Now, some of the downsides of that flexibility, I do believe that Uber takes a larger percentage of the fare and provides a lower percentage back to the driver. I think it can be as much as 45%. So if the ride is a $10 ride, they take $4.50 and you receive $5.50. Now, that's not including an increased fare, and that's also not factoring in the bonus that you could receive at the end of the week. But I do know that Uber, from my experience, and this isn't necessarily everyone's experience, but in my experience, Uber tends to take a higher percentage of the fare from the driver than Lyft does. So you might make a little bit more working for Lyft on a per ride basis, percentage wise on each fare, but you lose some of that flexibility that you have with Uber. Another thing that I've seen is that Uber demand, at least in the Twin Cities, in Minneapolis and St. Paul, seems to be a little higher and at a higher frequency than the demand for Lyft. Both apps have a feature where you can look and see what the increased fare rate is, approximately based on a particular geographic area. It's kind of hard to explain it in words, but Uber uses deep orange and then less deep orange and then light orange to indicate the increased fare rates because of, say, a snowstorm. And I think Lyft uses pink, light pink, medium pink, and like some dark pink, which is almost like a rosé red color. I would say that the demand, based on what I've seen during weather events like snowstorms, hailstorms, intense rain, during sporting events like the Timberwolves or the Twins, or concerts, that sort of thing. To me, it looks as if the demand from a frequency perspective is higher with Uber. So what that means is if you go out and drive 5 or 6 hours for Uber, the chances that you pick up more rides, in my experience, is higher than if you drive for Lyft. I've found that in driving for Lyft, there can be a little bit longer time period in between each ride. Now, with Lyft, however, the fare rate can increase, I think, more than what the fare rate increases with Uber. And Uber's fare increase system, I think, goes up to 3 or 4 times. With Lyft, I think it can go up to 600-700% more, so 6 or 7 times more than the regular fare. So I think it's possible to get less rides with Lyft, but make about the same amount of money that you would make with Uber, giving more rides at a slightly lower percentage in terms of the take that you get as a driver. So those are a few of the differences between Uber and Lyft. I find that riders are pretty loyal to the company that they work for. Some people that I've given rides to don't really care. They use Uber or Lyft. It doesn't really matter, whichever one gets to them quicker. But I think overall, people who ride Uber tend to stick with Uber, and people who ride with Lyft tend to stick with Lyft. When Uber was going through some of the organizational and leadership issues that they had over the last few years, which I think were pretty significant based on what I read in the news and what I heard from folks, there was kind of this negative connotation with Uber, at least in the Twin Cities, where people felt like Lyft was the up-and-comer and Lyft provided a better service and treated their drivers better, and on and on. I don't know if that's necessarily the case now. It may have been, but I know that Uber has also been very open lately with the new leadership that they have to hearing from their drivers and getting feedback from their drivers. I know that I get surveyed on a higher frequency by Uber in terms of how I think the app is working, how I think the fares are, does it am I enjoying driving for Uber? I don't get as much of that from Lyft, but I also don't drive for as much as Lyft as I used to back in the past. When I did, I didn't get a lot of that from Lyft. And that was something that I felt like I had to proactively put forward to Lyft. They did survey a little bit, but it wasn't at the highest as high a frequency as what Uber provides. If you're thinking of driving for Uber or Lyft, you can certainly let me know. Instant message me, text message me if you have my number. Leave a comment. I'm happy to talk, at length about driving and rideshare. And I would say that if you are thinking about doing rideshare and working as a driver for Uber or Lyft, you will want to probably do that relatively soon. The case out in New York with the city council in which they capped or are going to cap the number of drivers means that you're going to want to get in relatively soon to ensure that you have an opportunity to drive if you plan to do that. Of course, you have to have a reliable vehicle. I don't know that Lyft has really stringent rules about the vehicle you drive, but I think it has to be around 2006, 2007 vintage. Uber, I think, is a little less strict about the type of vehicle that you drive. At least they have been in the past. But in any case, if you want to drive for one or both of the companies, you have to make sure that you go to a car place, whether it's Meineke or Victory or whatever it might be, and you've got to make sure that your car passes that check. They do I think a 20-some point inspection of your vehicle. You also have to have updated insurance, and the insurance piece is something that you really have to be careful with. Not all of the insurance carriers cover your vehicle's damage in the event of there being an accident. I know that Uber and Lyft have their own insurance policies, but let's just put it this way. Having been in an accident and having been rear-ended by another vehicle, I found out pretty quickly that I wanted to get an added piece of insurance. And in fact, we switched our insurance as a result of my doing rideshare part-time. Currently, we're with, I believe it's Farmers, and Farmers offers for a pretty reasonable monthly price additional insurance that covers for rideshare. And so definitely look into that. And if you have specific questions about the insurance piece, I'm not going to go into great detail about that here live on the channel, but I'd be happy to talk further and provide any support or information regarding that to folks if they're interested or currently as a driver or interested in potentially becoming a driver. So which is better, Uber or Lyft? I really can't say which is better. I think most of the consumers that I talk to feel and believe, and I would say some know, that Uber and Lyft is more reliable than the old taxi system. Now, I'm not saying anything negative about taxis, but for those of you that have done taxis before in the past in the Twin Cities, I know that they sometimes have not been the most reliable, and the costs have been pretty extensive, far more expensive than Uber or Lyft. And in fact, I think for some of the riders that I've provided rides to, people have said that the cost is 30 to 40 to sometimes 50% cheaper to take Uber or Lyft than it is to take a taxi. And the reliability and the wait time for the Uber or Lyft driver to arrive is a lot less, anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes, maybe 7-10 minutes at the most, but not, 30, 40, 50 minutes as some people have had to wait for taxis. How does Uber and Lyft impact mass transit and transportation? I think that's a very important question that needs to be asked. And I think that was a good part of the reason why the New York City Council decided to step in and do a little more regulation on Uber and Lyft. One of the things that I was very interested about in the article in The Verge was that New York City is wanting to ensure that drivers make at least $15 an hour. and that there's a minimum wage component with what Uber and Lyft provide their drivers. I think that's a fantastic idea. I think it's kind of feast or famine with rideshare. If the demand is up and it's cold out, like it was last winter, many days and nights, you can stand to make some decent money. What's decent money? The last snowstorm that we had in April, I drove, I think, for 8 hours, and I made over $600 in 8 hours. I don't think it's too bad. Now, that doesn't factor into the equation gasoline, taxes, wear and tear in your vehicle, the stress of driving in a snowstorm, whatever that quantifies as dollars for you. I don't know what that would be. It wasn't too stressful for me, but so you got to factor those things in too. We're at the 25-minute mark. I could talk a little bit about the tax piece. Again, like I said before, I'm not an accountant, but I do have some experiences and some knowledge around the tax piece pertaining to rideshare, but I'm not going to get into that today. There are definitely ways to run this through your own LLC. So if you're interested in doing an LLC or a sole proprietorship, you can run this through your business, which isn't a bad thing to consider, especially if the tax implications are favorable for you. And there's also deals on getting gasoline. So I work with Shell. I like Shell, and I like the program that they offer. And I get 5 to 10 to 20 to 25 cents off per gallon when I gas up. And that's every time that I go to Shell. And so there's some ways to shave the cost down. What do you make on the hour? It varies. It varies. And a lot of it is dependent upon demand, supply and demand. What I found in Minneapolis and St. Paul is that the public transit system is maxed out in many ways because it does not take much rain or much snow or much cold or much ice for the demand for Uber and Lyft to go up significantly. And in that regard, it's good for drivers. I don't know that it's necessarily good for traffic congestion because you've got more single cars out there going. But I think for consumers that do want to spend the money and don't want to wait for 30, 40 minutes or have the bus not come by and stop and have to end up getting to work late, I think Uber and Lyft is a nice option for folks. I don't know that it's something that I would personally do on a regular basis, but I think if I didn't have a vehicle and I was tired of doing public transportation Monday through Thursday, yeah, I might spring for the $8 to $10 to take an Uber or a Lyft to work and back. Especially in the wintertime when it gets pretty cold up here in the Twin Cities. So hopefully that was informational. Uber versus Lyft, some thoughts and thinking around that. And if you're not familiar with either or, when next time you're in a major city, try taking an Uber or a Lyft and let me know how it goes. Also wanted to let people know, lastly, that I added information about where you can find the book, Uncovering Indigenous Models of Leadership, which I talked about yesterday and have talked about in a couple of the other videos, as well as the EP album, Heart of the Matter. There is some information that should show up on the video page today where you can access that information. If you've enjoyed the videos, please take some time to like. It's helpful. And or share the video or tell someone else about the videos. And maybe there'll be a topic or a subject that they're interested in learning more about. I don't presume to think that every video is everyone's soup du jour, but I hope that a couple of the videos are helpful to people and are supportive of you getting the things that you need to be happy and successful and all that sort of thing. I know that the starting an LLC video seemed to be pretty well received based on the number of views and such. So Alofa Leiataua, love to you and your families.